regard?
We did, yes.
Janice, can you put that up for us, please? Provide one here to the court to mark as
Yes, you may.
court's exhibit next.
22.
Court's Exhibit 22.
And does this help you explain what we're going to go through by way of timing here?
Yes.
All right. Now, as I said, we started with State Exhibit 35, which was the executive summary that we talked about at length in your direct.
Yes.
And then the media report, which was an exhibit, I think it's March of 2002. Do you remember that document?
I do.
And it referred to something called New Dawn data. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Then we have the FDA warning letter, which is S States Exhibit 38, dated 9/2/04. You see that?
I do, yes.
Now, between 2001, or actually between 2002, the New Dawn data reference, March of 2002, and the FDA warning letter, what happened?
So the Duragesic brand team had created promotional materials that, a visual aid as well as a file card that utilized the Dawn data in their promotional materials.
And that's been referred to for the court's reference as S2538.
Yes.
You talked about it at length,
Yes.
and it is the subject of the FDA letter that came out in September of 2004, correct?
Yes, sir.
So this Dawn data, the new Dawn data that you referenced to the court, can you tell him a little bit about that, what that was?
So as far as I know, and I am not here to testify specifically on the Dawn data, but as far as I know, that Dawn data was updated to include more years of data in it, and the team felt that the data was, because of that inclusion, it was more robust.
Now, this material that's referred to as S2538, was it also subject to review by the FDA at some point?
Yes.
Okay.
Both of those would be submitted to the FDA through the form.
All right, now the court has seen all of those exhibits. They've already been admitted into evidence up to the FDA warning letter, but I'd like to show you Janssen's response to the FDA warning letter, which is J861, which comes on that timeline.
You may approach.
I think it is in your binder.
Yep.
Can you tell the court what that is?
So this is the response letter from our regulatory individual at the time, who was James Burris. And this is in response to the FDA warning letter that was sent on 9/2/2004.
For purposes of the record, it is dated September 17th of 2004,
Yes.
and we would move into evidence J861 at this point.
Your Honor, we do not object to the state using this letter and a waiver of their objection to using the
No.
SCBA and FDA letter that was one of their prior motions, so we're fine with it.
It is admitted solely because the court overruled the motion in limine and clearly offered for that purpose.
No objection.
Janssen's 861 will be admitted into the evidence.
Now, ma'am, referring to 861, which is now in evidence in response to the submission of the warning letter and over our objection in the motion in limine, can you just tell who that letter is addressed to?
It is addressed to Thomas W. Abrams, RPH, MBA, Director, the Division of Drug Marketing, Advertising, and Communications, which, sir, if you hear us say DDMAC, that is what the promotional arm of the FDA is called, the Drug Marketing, Advertising, and Communications. Or, I'm sorry, Division of, so DDMAC.
And if there's another term the court may hear, another acronym that describes kind of what DDMAC does, can you tell Judge Bachman what that is?
So DDMAC changed its name, as we hear all people starting to change their name, to OPDP in future years. So that is the Office of Pharmaceutical Drug Promotion.
Okay. So let's cover some of this letter. The last sentence of paragraph 1 indicates what?
We have carefully reviewed your letter and are providing the following response.
And go ahead and read the immediate sentence following.
Janssen and J&J PRD respectfully disagree with DDMAC's position that the professional file card, DR 850, for Duragesic makes false or misleading statements about the abuse potential, effectiveness, and other risks of the drug.
And what is a file card again for the court?
A file card is a promotional piece that the sales representatives would use to detail or to explain or educate the doctor around the benefits and risks associated with the drug.
And would that file card have been submitted pursuant to Form 2253 at some point to the FDA?
Yes.
Okay. Now let's go down to the low abuse potential section and just read what the response says to the FDA about their concerns about low reported rates of mentions in DAWN data.
So relative to your concerns regarding emergency department visits and deaths, and is a valid, well-recognized, and respected source for information about substance abuse.
Back at this time in 2004, was the government using DAWN data?
Yes, they were.
In fact, is DAWN data kept by the government?
It is, yes.
Which department do you know?
SAMHSA,
Which stands for?
Substance Abuse Substance Abuse Mental Health. I know some of it.
That's good enough.
That's all right.
Okay, and then this letter contains a couple of studies, a graph. The court has it, you can look through it. Then we get over following those studies and graph to the sentence on page 6. Below the last of the studies. And what does that first sentence say? Page 6.
Page 6.
Yeah. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
Okay,
Got it?
I do. As stated previously, we believe the DAWN database and the above additional information provides significant support regarding the low abuse potential among Schedule II opioids.
Okay, but then, regardless of all of that, flip over to page 8. There's a plan of action section. You see that?
I do.
Would you please tell Judge Bachman what the plan of action was in Jansen's response to the letter sent by D.D. Mack?
Yes. Although we disagree with D.D. Mack's assertions that the file card conveys false or misleading information and encourages the unsafe use of Duragesic, we have decided to take the following actions. The discontinuation of the professional file card cited in your September 2nd, 2004 letter, the discontinuation of all promotional materials containing the same or similar representations. Please see attachment 2 for a complete listing of materials.
And finally,
we request to meet with you at your earliest convenience to further discuss the issues raised in your letter and any additional actions necessary.
all right, and then the final sentence on page 9, Janice, if you can flick over.
We trust that this letter adequately responds to your September 2nd, 2004 letter, and we look forward to resolving this matter in a timely fashion.
Signed by whom?
James Burris, the Associate Director of Regulatory Affairs, Advertising and Promotion.
All right, let's go back to our timeline. That's in September. All that back and forth occurs.
Yes?
And as part of that action, what happens next?
So in the response or in the back and forth with the FDA, we discontinued the use of all of those promotional materials as outlined in the letter. And then we sent a Dear Doctor letter out to physicians.
Can you explain to Judge Bachman what a Dear Doctor letter is?
Similar to the letter that we looked at prior, as far as whenever there are updates to a label, a Dear Doctor letter is a very specific letter that alerts physicians to any promotional activities. So it is something that it's an alert. It's something that the doctors, know to look at. It is considered something that they are to pay attention to.
Your Honor, brother.
Yes, you may.
We've been talking about J129. We hand a copy of it to you, ma'am, and ask if you can identify that.
This is the Dear Doctor letter.
We would move J129 in evidence, again, subject to the prior ruling by the court overruling our motion of limine and objection to the FDA warning letter, just in response thereto.
Your Honor, we don't believe you can offer something subject to it, but we do not object to them offering this information.
J129 will be admitted into the evidence.
Yes, I suspect all that will be resolved by somebody smarter than Mr. Beckworth and I put together. But
You may also publish if you'd like.
you've already told us what J129 is. It is now in evidence, ma'am. It's got Jansen there at the top.
Yes?
What is that black box at the beginning?
It outlines that there is important correction of drug information.
And it's to healthcare professional.
Yes.
Who does this letter go to?
So it goes to doctors, pharmacists, and nurses.
How many?
So it's my understanding this went to over 75,000 doctors, nurses, and pharmacists.
And does it say in plain English what's happening here?
It does.
Can you just read the first and second paragraph to the court?
The Food and Drug Administration, FDA, Division of Drug Marketing, Advertising, and Communications, DDMAC, has asked us to contact you because Janssen Pharmaceutica Products LP received a warning letter on September 2nd, 2004, concerning a promotional file card for Duragesic, fentanyl transdermal system. The warning letter concluded that a promotional file card distributed by Janssen made false or misleading claims about the abuse potential and adverse event profile of the drug and included unsubstantiated effectiveness claims for Duragesic in violation of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act.
Thank you, ma'am. And would you spin that letter over to the back on page 2? We see a black box. Is that a portion of the warning that is being sent with this letter?
That is the black box warning, yes.
You say this went to 75,000 healthcare providers nationwide,
Yes,
pharmacists,
yes,
doctors,
yes,
nurses.
yes,
It's part of that letter discussing drug abuse and dependence and indications for usage out of the FDA label.
yes, it is.
Okay. Now, ma'am, are you familiar with something called radars?
I am at a high level.
Okay, what is radars?
Research, abuse, diversion, addiction, research, I don't know the second R.
Surveillance?
Surveillance, yes.
Maybe.
It is a surveillance system.
Anyway, tell the judge what radars does.
So radars is a, as I said, a drug abuse or addiction surveillance system that monitors exactly what it says. It monitors abuse, addiction across, as far as I know, across multiple different ways. They monitor different systems to look at what those potential abuse and addiction type of rates are.
And are you aware of what the radar's data up to date says about the low abuse potential of Duragesic?
Your Honor, we object to use of radars as hearsay. They need to specify what years they're talking about, just so you understand the objection. Radar was actually something that was owned by Purdue, and it was part of the the drug company industry for a long period of time. At some point it went into, I believe, the Denver Health Department, but I don't think they can use that.
Sorry, Your Honor, I disagree. She's described what it is and what it does, and I'd ask her if she's familiar what it shows about the low rates of abuse of Duragesic to date.
It's rank hearsay. The rank is there.
What is the date? It says
The
2002.
radar
on there.
started in 2002 onward. It's now being, as he says, monitored by Health Department of Denver or some entity in Denver.
Well, in part, but it was created by Purdue as part of its self-service and trying to push back against ACCME's claims.
I'll overrule the objection.
Thank you, ma'am. And I don't want to go, there'll be a lot more testimony about this later, but just as a high level, what is your understanding of what the radar's data has shown about the low abuse potential of Duragesic?
So it's my understanding that the abuse potential or the abuse shown with Duragesic, even in today, like currently, it shows a low abuse of Duragesic.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll move on now. We were talking about branded marketing, and we got into this by branded marketing of Duragesic. Did Nucynta and Nucynta ER also have branded marketing?
Yes,
Like the Duragesic branded marketing, was that branded marketing submitted to the FDA on Form 2253?
yes.
Would you put up, 31. Before I put it up, I guess I'll show it here. I think you have a copy in your
I do.
binder, Judge. May I approach?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
Would you tell the judge what that document is?
So this is a Nucynta ER branded piece, similar to what we had talked about earlier when I was describing different promotional branded pieces. This is a dosing and titration guide. This is a guide that a sales representative would leave behind with a physician, an HCP, to allow them to understand how they would dose or titrate Nucynta ER.
We would move 3163 in evidence.
No objection.
3163 will be admitted into the evidence.
Now, you recall some time ago, we were talking about the visual aids for Duragesic. Tell me what this does, and you're free to go through it there and call out any part you want, but if we look at the very cover, what does it say it's supposed to be?
So it clearly outlines that it's a dosing and titration guide. At the bottom, it outlines the indication for Nucynta ER as moderate to severe chronic pain in adults and neuropathic pain associated with diabetic peripheral neuropathy, DPN, in adults, when a continuous around-the-clock opioid analgesic is needed for an extended period of time.
Now, there's a visit www.nucynta.com, the website.
Correct.
You've been shown a Duragesic website.
Yes.
Are those websites also submitted to the FDA?
Yes, they are.
Now, below, what does it say about what you can find in this book?
Please see important safety information, including the box warnings.
Box warnings being the ones we talked about in the FDA label earlier today when I had you read them to the court.
Yes.
Okay, if you could go to page 3. This is a brochure, Your Honor. I don't think they've labeled the fronts, so sometimes 3 comes out as 2, or because the front doesn't have a page number. But we have got it marked as page 3 of the exhibit. What is this, ma'am?
This is the important safety information, and this outlines the warning of abuse, potential life-threatening respiratory depression, accidental exposure, and interaction with alcohol.
Is this the only reference to warnings or safety or dangers contained in this piece of promotional material that is on file with the FDA pursuant to Form 2253?
No, there's additional data.
And then pull up 11 for her. Yes, and if you find other things you want to talk about in between page 3 and 11, please feel free to do so.
It is a continuation on page 11, repeats that black box warning, and then goes into more of the indications of usage, the contraindications, warnings and precautions, and additional information that the FDA deems appropriate for us to ensure clinicians are aware of.
And is there an additional pull-out on page 13 of that brochure to discuss safety?
It does, yes.
And you let the judge know what this is discussing.
So the first bullet point reads, assess each patient's risk for opioid abuse or addiction prior to prescribing Nucynta ER. The risk for opioid abuse is increased in patients with a personal or family history of substance abuse, including drug or alcohol abuse or addiction, or mental illness, example, major depression. Patients at increased risk may still be appropriately treated with modified release opioid formulations. However, these patients will require intensive monitoring for signs of misuse, abuse, or addiction. Routinely monitor all patients receiving opioids for signs of misuse, abuse, and addiction because these drugs carry a risk for addiction even under appropriate medical use.
And just the next two, you can either tell the judge can read them off the board, but you can go ahead and read them into the record with the court's permission.
Yes.
Misuse or abuse of Nucynta ER by crushing, chewing, snorting, or injecting the dissolved product will result in uncontrolled delivery of the opioid and pose a significant risk that could result in overdose and death. Contact local state professional licensing board or state-controlled substance authority for information on how to prevent and detect abuse or diversion of this product.
Thank you, ma'am. And was this used in the same way by sales representatives as the prior Duragesic information we've discussed?
This would be used in the interaction with clinicians, yes.
And did it go through the same PRC process that we previously discussed with Judge Bachman this morning?
Yes, it would have gone through the same regulatory review process as any branded promotional material would.
Now, this was only used with healthcare professionals?
Yes.
Earlier, we were talking about something that got abbreviated as DTC. Can you remind Judge Bachman what that is?
DTC is a term used to describe direct-to-consumer.
And is there a difference between DTC and what I'll call DTP?
Yes. So we talked about direct-to-consumer being that type of advertising that is directed at the patient without the interaction with the clinician or the HCP. That is direct to the patient. And the best example, and I think I used it yesterday, last week, talking about like DTC television advertising, where the medicine, the pharmaceutical is promoted to encourage a patient to ask for the drug from their clinician. In direct-to-patient is given through the provider after the prescription has been written as an educational material for that patient around the appropriate use of that drug. So there's a difference between what we term direct-to-consumer and direct-to-patient.
Did Janssen market either Duragesic or Nucynta in magazines or on TV or in newspapers, for example?
Direct-to-consumer, no, we did not.
Now, you recall you were asked some questions about this from a slide deck that referred to TTC.
Yes.
Did Janssen ever follow up on that suggestion for DTC, direct-to-consumer advertising?
Yes, so I think that it's important to understand oftentimes, and what we were looking at was a business plan from the marketing team. And oftentimes a business plan will have different ideas that the brand team may be considering in marketing their product over a period of time. In this case, most often our business plans are a year. And so there are many ideas that are brought forward, but not all of those ideas actually come to fruition. So oftentimes the brand team will explore different ideas, and then as they explore, they may do research, they may go out to key opinion leaders who are thought leaders in the market or in the community to find out what their thoughts are, as well as do just fact finding as far as looking at whether or not they end up doing a specific tactic.
I'm going to hand you what has been marked as J3926, and ask if you can identify that. Copy for the board. Counselor.
So this is a record of FDA contact.
We'd offer J3926 into evidence.
No objection.
J3926 will be admitted into the evidence.
Tell Judge Bachman what this is and what it reflects.
So this is an interaction between Janssen and DDMAC, the promotional group, again, for the FDA. And this is an interaction discussing with them our decision not to proceed with direct-to-consumer advertising concerning Duragesic. It describes that there has been a discussion back and forth with DDMAC, and that the time in that discussion has been appreciated, but an internal communication and an internal meeting took place where the decision was made that we would not proceed with direct-to-consumer advertising. So clearly an example is what we just discussed. In the business plan, there may have been ideas that might have been something we would do, but in the discussions with DDMAC going back and forth, sharing ideas, the decision ultimately was made not to move forward with that.
Now, returning, ma'am, to patient brochures, which have been discussed and were discussed in your direct testimony, did Nucynta have a patient brochure?
Yes, we did.
This patient brochure would have gone through PRC?
Yes, absolutely.
Have there been any other level of control for it?
So the Nucynta patient brochure, I was already off the team at this time, but I do remember the teams back and forth. The patient brochure for Nucynta, it was Nucynta ER, went through several reviews, and actually we engaged with the FDA in creating this patient brochure. The FDA gave us feedback prior to it actually being, used in the field. So this brochure came out in 2014.
If I may approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
This is in your binder, Your Honor, so I'm going to hand it up. J3173. Ma'am, can you tell me what that is?
So this is the patient brochure, again, that a physician would give to a patient who has already been prescribed Nucynta as informational or educational.
We'd move the admission of J3173.
J3173 will be admitted into the evidence.
Now, I want to, you go through any part of that brochure you want. I will eventually call out page 4 to you. But if you think there's something else in there that would help Judge Bachman understand this exhibit, please go ahead and tell him. Are we page 4?
We are page 4.
Okay. Tell us what is reflected on page 4 of the Nucynta patient brochure.
So it describes why the patient was likely prescribed Nucynta ER. Briefly, it says you were prescribed Nucynta ER tapentadol extended release tablets because you have pain severe enough to require a daily around-the-clock treatment, and you have had at least one of the following. You've previously taken a non-opioid like Tylenol or Motrin, or immediate-release opioid like Vicodin that didn't treat your pain well enough. So again, this is an extended-release product that is used when that patient needs that round-the-clock treatment.
And over on the other side, ma'am, following up on those bullet points.
So difficulty tolerating or previously taken pain medication, or pain from nerve damage caused by diabetes that is not controlled or tolerated with other treatments.
And then that part there below what you have just read.
It is important.
Sure.
It is important to know that Nucynta ER tapentadol extended release tablets is a long-acting opioid medication, pain medication, and should not be used on an as-needed basis. This medicine can put you at risk for overdose and death. Even if you take your dose correctly as prescribed, you are at risk for opioid addiction, abuse, and misuse that can lead to death. It is important to be open and honest with your healthcare professional during treatment.
And you say this patient brochure would have been used in the year 2014?
Yes.
Does it contain any other references to safety information?
It calls attention to important safety information on page 13 and through 17.
And we've kind of talked black boxes and box warnings. We can just tell the judge what it refers to on pages 13 and 17.
So 13, it does talk to the important safety information
Yes.
around addiction, abuse, and misuse.
Well, it says, please see related additional important safety information.
Yes, I'm sorry.
The bolded portion.
Yes, I'm sorry, I thought I called that out. Bolded underneath, it does say, please see related and additional important safety information.
All right, and we talked about, I think there's a website mentioned maybe in this brochure, but was that also submitted to the FDA?
Yes.
Okay. There has been some talk, ma'am, about coupons. Are coupons a form of branded or are they unbranded marketing?
Coupons
Yes.
would be branded marketing.
And that's because they name the prescription medicine, right?
Yes.
Okay. You remember you were asked some questions on a state exhibit about coupons.
Yes.
Okay. Do coupons go through the PRC the way the other information has gone?
Yes, it does.
And what exactly are medication coupons for the record?
So, as we discussed, a coupon or a voucher or is a trial. It's intended to allow the patient to and the physician to trial the drug to see if the drug is provides them the benefit, in this case of analgesia, but that they can also tolerate the drug.
Just to remind the court of the context of our discussion, Janice, can you bring up already admitted exhibit S0582? You remember being questioned about this?
Yes.
Okay. And specifically going to, I think it's page 15, Jen. Right there. I remembered that. You see that 2002 investment
Yes.
and then the return on investment?
Yes.
I asked you to use Mr. Burge's cell phone to just multiply 300,000 times 13 to 1.
I remember that.
Now, what does that $300,000 investment entail?
So after I looked at this, and I told Mr. Beckworth that this caused me to hesitate. It didn't make sense to me. So I went back and I re-looked at this, and the reason it didn't make sense to me is that $300,000 was a number that wasn't meshing appropriately with me. And what I realized is that the $300,000 investment is based on the printing of these coupons, vouchers. And now that may seem very expensive to print. You immediately think of you're just printing a sheet of paper, but there was a unique code for that voucher to be able to be used at the pharmacy to represent or for the prescription. It had to be associated with a prescription, but there was a unique number on that would allow the pharmacy to adjudicate that prescription through the voucher. What I mean by adjudicate, and if you know this, please tell me to stop. Adjudication is when the pharmacy will process the prescription and they determine who pays for that prescription, what insurance company it goes to, and then what the copay associated with that prescription, what the patient actually pays. That's what is called the adjudication process. So I apologize if I've used that. My own lawyers asked me, wait a second. So that is the process that we call adjudication. There is a unique number associated with a voucher, and that's almost like those barcodes, because you have to obviously take a lot of, there has to be due diligence in this because you don't want coupons just running around. They have to be associated with a coupon, or I'm sorry, with a prescription, and they have to be specific to be able to be adjudicated. So it is expensive to print them.
Now,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, so does that $300,000, for example, include the price of the medication that you are ultimately going to let the patient try?
No, and that's why I looked at that and was questioning that. That doesn't include the cost of the medication itself associated with that voucher. In this case, this was a 5-patch or a 15-day trial with the medications, and that cost associated with, again, that adjudicated script would go back to the gross to net calculation at the end of the processing. It would not hit the marketing budget. So in this case, this 13-1 is associated with the marketing budget. It is not actual. That's not a real.
Well, you were shown this page 15. Let's look at page 16. What in the world is that?
So page 16 actually describes what occurred with the coupons. So if you look at...
Can you take the judge through that, please?
Yes. So Judge, and I apologize, my head's at you again, back of my head. So this is looking at, if we start at the top, the incremental TRXs, which is total prescriptions per month. Those incremental, they vary by specialty. So this was analyzed over a 6-month time frame. If you look at the y-axis, this is looking at incremental new prescriptions per coupon, and the x-axis is looking at the different specialties. So our sales representatives called on pain specialists, they called on primary care physicians, and they called on oncologists. In the primary care setting, they submitted or they provided a little over 10,000 coupons. And in that case, for every coupon, they got just under 1 script. So some patients never followed up on, another script. They didn't tolerate it, whatever the case may be, and some actually did get a script. In the pain specialists, those folks got a little over 16,000 coupons, which you would expect because pain specialists saw more of this patient population. And in that case, each voucher related to or equated to a little over 1 script, so 1.29 scripts associated with that voucher. From an oncologist perspective, the voucher equated to about 1 script, and then overall, all combined, that voucher equated to a little over 1 script following that trial.
So 1.15 scripts per coupon, is that the total takeaway from the 27,574 trial coupons that were used?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, you've heard some discussion in this case about sales representatives.
Yes,
Have you ever been a sales representative?
I have.
You have actually detailed physicians?
I have.
That term detail, where in the world does that come from?
So it is a term that has been used often around the pharmaceutical industry. A detail is basically providing an HCP, a healthcare professional, the details about the drug, the benefits and the risks associated with the drug. So that's where that term comes from, detailing, details associated with the drug.
And what would one have to do to get a job as a sales representative for Janssen, as you did at some point?
So they are required to have a Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor of Science degree, oftentimes a even an MBA is appreciated. It's not required, but they are required to have a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science. Sales experience is something that is positive, because this is not an easy area to work in. So sales experience is also in some cases required depending on the marketplace, but not always required.
How do you recruit people that are going to ultimately become sales reps for Janssen?
Similarly to other businesses, you would use headhunters, you use recruiters.
Have you actually interviewed people for this position?
I have.
Can you tell Judge Bachman what that process is?
So it's an extensive process. I can give you my experience in my process that I went through. I went through multiple interviews. I started interviewing probably in the January, February timeframe, and I was hired in July. So several interviews, several different individuals. Oftentimes, you'll go out in the field with a sales representative to interact and see what the environment is, what that interaction looks like. But again, it's a multi-step, multi-interview process.
Once you have decided on an individual to hire, are they trained in any way?
Absolutely, yes.
Can you please give Judge Bachman an overview of how a sales representative would be trained at Janssen?
So I think we discussed this a little bit. There is multiple components of the training process. They start off with home study, which is often interactive, computer-based. They are assigned what we call a field learning advisor or a trainer that is a one-on-one with them to walk them through the process. This is an experienced sales representative who has, many times has trained before, but obviously they could be, the first training, but they're well-versed in the information and the understanding. And so they're assigned that trainer that helps them through this home study.
Excuse me, you're talking about home study. Let me approach, Your Honor, if I might, and show you what has been marked as Janssen 1492. Ask if you can identify that. It should be on the
So this is an example, 2012 schedule of home study from our sales learning and development department. And this just outlines the several days of home study that a sales representative would go through.
Hang on just a second, wait a minute.
Okay.
Your Honor, J 3926 has been admitted into evidence. If you recall, I provided a copy to the court.
Yes.
It is offered as a rebuttal exhibit to the direct-to-consumer advertising that we had before it's admitted without objection. I just thought I'd put that in the record.
Thank you.
No, it's the response to the questioning you did about direct-to-consumer advertising. No, I said it's something we have offered in response to what you produced yesterday.
You said it's already been
It was admitted without objection. No, today,
Just a few minutes ago.
just a few minutes ago.
I just wasn't sure which one you were referring to, that's what I was
All
The
right,
saying.
I'm sorry, I
one-page
had-
record of FDA contact.
Yes, got it.
I'm sorry.
I thought you were referring to something new.
No.
Got it.
No. I'm sorry, I interrupted. I had to go back and do some housekeeping. So can you help me out and pick up where we were?
Sure. So Judge, this is a schedule. This is an example of a home study or a schedule of how a sales representative would be trained. and this is in the 2012 timeframe. So this is during the Nucynta, I should say Nucynta ER timeframe.
And you said this is the home study curriculum?
Yes.
I can't remember whether I offered it, but I will offer J 1492 as evidence. Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Or can I just have a second? He was talking about this document.
Absolutely, no objection to Mr. Beckworth thoroughly reviewing this exhibit.
No, I just want to make sure you were talking. We have no objection.
Jansen 1492 will be admitted into the evidence.
Is there something else in this exhibit? I think we've talked about pages 11, 12, and 13 before, but you're free to use any part of this exhibit you want, ma'am, to talk to Judge Bachman about this in-home training course that the sales representatives take.
So it just goes through, Judge, in the first couple days. It's really around the employee orientation. So it goes through different things that they have to understand. It goes through their understanding their computer, the computer systems. It goes through our credo values. It goes through their policy on business conduct. I know that you've seen that. That's put into evidence, expense reporting system. So the first few days are really around that employee orientation as they join, our company. They go into compliance training, sample compliance. If there are drugs that they are going to sample, they have to understand what the rules and regulations associated with that are. So all of that training is done in this time frame.
And is this training program reviewed internally at Jansen?
Yes, it goes through a similar process as our PRC, but not the full committee reviews it, but the medical reviews it, the regulatory reviews it, so that the training is aligned and consistent with our label.
Please tell me there's another acronym
Label.
we can use. If I said MRC, what would that be?
Medical Review Committee.
And is that the process you're talking to Judge Bachman about?
Yes.
Now, is this all of the training that a sales representative would get?
So again, this is the training that they do prior to them going to what we call our home office training, and that is a live training where individuals who have been hired around the same time are brought into a specific location. Oftentimes it is our home office, and they are, that training is really application training. They then are trained on the messages associated with, or the materials and resources they have to communicate our clinical trials, our the efficacy, the side effects associated with our drug. We often talk about, and I know over the course of the last several minutes we've talked about safety, the safety profile. I think it's important to kind of hesitate and say, in the sense of when we talk about safety associated in pharmaceuticals, that's truly the side effects, the risks. Those are all of the information that the clinician needs to understand along with the efficacy. So it's that benefit-risk balance that they are trained on, and that's the application piece is when they are in this home office setting.
In the home office, I'm sorry.
I have a question. On the home study, what's the accountability to make sure, how do you verify they've done it or assess them?
That's a great question. So as they go through different modules, they're tested. And it is a test that obviously monitors whether or not their understanding is there. They have to acquire a 90 or above. They get 2 chances on that exam. If they fail twice, then it's escalated up to, in this case, my current role, the region business director, as well as the sales trainers. And there's a discussion that takes place as to understanding what the issue is. And then the individual is given another opportunity once they may need additional training. It may be identified that there are specific issues that can be addressed, and then they are given another chance to pass. If they fail again, then there's questions on whether or not they are viable.
Are those exams given throughout the 4 to 8 weeks or at the conclusion of the 33 courses?
So there are tests throughout, so module tests. So they have questions very similar to an interactive type of study where as you go through different areas, there's questions that they're asked throughout, and then there's a test at the end of that module, say that is a 3-hour module. They'll have a test, an assessment that they take, and they take multiple assessments throughout the course of their study, and then there's likely, oftentimes, a full test at the end.
If you'll look, ma'am, at almost any one of these sections, I'll just direct your attention to page 8. Bottom box, I hope I've gotten to the right place. Addresses the question the court asked, I hope, which is at the very bottom, Guide to Institutional E-Learning Assessment. We'll try to find one that addresses the court's.
Oh, I see it there on page 8.
Yeah, okay.
There's a 1-hour
Yes.
assessment. Got it.
Yeah, it's Guide to Institutional E-Learning there at the bottom.
And that's an example of one of the modules that was around, this is customer, the different systems that they would engage in, understanding the systems, so they would be tested on their understanding of that.
And if we want to talk about Nucynta itself, we go to page 12. Do you see the answer to the court's questions reflected there as you've described them?
Halfway down, Judge, or a little less than halfway, it says the Nucynta Mastery Assessment. There's a 60-question multiple choice assessment.
I see it.
Can you see that? 2
Yes.
attempts only?
Okay, having completed the home study, is that all that's done?
No, as I started to describe, after the home study is completed, the representative oftentimes will go out with their sales trainer into the sales trainer's territory to see the sales trainer interact with clinicians. And after that, then they go into, and they'll have multiple days with that. They'll have days with their DM, with their district manager interacting, and then they have study that they'll go to in the home office.
Okay, tell me and tell Judge Botman about going to the home office.
So this is often depending on the different medications that they may be selling. That may be, as we talked about, the different application training that takes place in the home office, and that may be over the course of 2 to 3 weeks, where they engage and again apply and learn the different resources and are applying that learning in role play situations, et cetera.
Would there be people in the home office that would talk to these people and train them?
Absolutely. So there's a sales learning and development team that actually is basically in charge of the training of our sales team, but in the course of those 2 to 3 weeks that they're in, the medical affairs folks may come down to answer questions that they may have. The healthcare compliance officer is likely to come and answer any questions that they may have in a live, setting.
And then to Judge Botman's point, is there a test administered after the in-house training?
So oftentimes there is, yes, and that is based on, the way they're able to understand the learnings that they've had and being able to communicate those appropriately.
From beginning to the end of the process that you have just described, can you give the court some idea of how long this takes?
It can take a few months, several months.
And after completion of this training, are there continuing obligations to stay current with what's going on in their field?
Absolutely. So sales representatives continue to be trained. If there are any updates, as we update clinicians on changes of label, obviously our sales representatives need to understand those as well. If there are updates to messaging, sales aids, anything of that, the sales representatives are trained on all of the different resources that take place. And so that training can take place depending on the extent of changes. That could be virtual training, that also could be live training as well.
Now, you have told us what the term detailing means. You have told us that you, in fact, yourself have acted as a sales representative and detailed.
Yes?
Who do you detail?
So you would detail healthcare professionals.
And who does that include?
So that would include, healthcare professionals would be the doctors, the nurse practitioners, the physician's assistants, even the nurses in the doctor's offices, those that interact with patients, and pharmacists. Again, those are folks who, because of the interaction with the patients, you want them to understand the benefits and risks associated with your products, so that if questions do come up, they can refer the patient back to the treating clinician.
And when you make a detailing call on a healthcare professional, what is your goal?
So your goal is, again, in the world that we live in the medicine world that we live in, our goal is to educate the provider on the benefits and risks associated with our medications. Ultimately, it is the physician's decision what medicine they use for their patient based on how the patient presents to them when they're in front of them, when they're talking with them in their waiting or in their exam room. So it is our goal to educate the doctor on, again, like I said, the benefits and risks associated with our drug, to help him understand how our drug differentiates itself, so that, again, he can make the best clinical decision for that patient.
How many times have you detailed a physician?
So I was a sales representative for 5 years, so hundreds, probably thousands of times.
Walk me through, based on your experience, an interaction with a physician during one of your visits.
So the interaction that you're going to have with a physician, you want the interaction not to be what we term a regurgitation, right? You just don't want to just like throw the data out, if that was a demonstrative to understand what I was meaning. You really want it to be a conversation, a back and forth, to better understand the clinician's patient population. What is the clinician looking for to address with this patient, and the specific disease state that you are talking with him about. So you're really trying to understand what that clinician's needs or his patient's needs are, and if your drug or medicine can address those needs. And so in that interaction, you try to understand whether or not your drug offers those benefits and risks, and you provide the doctor with that during that interaction. In some cases, the doctor, because you're calling on this doctor multiple times throughout the course of a year, a month, whatever the case may be, and so oftentimes the doctor has questions about something specific, And that's why the doctors will invite us back in. They'll invite us to come, in to talk with them so that they can, they may have a question specifically about side effects because a patient has experienced a side effect. But the interaction is very back and forth, and you're really wanting to understand whether or not your drug is something that would benefit their patients. And so you have that interaction with them.
How long does this interaction last usually, if there is a usually?
So oftentimes it could be like a very quick hit, 30-second. You have the file card. The doctor the last time asked you about a specific side effect, and you literally point out to the doctor that the side effect that you're associated with, here is the information that you requested. So please let me know if you have any more information. Now, another interaction may be, and we talked about it over the course of the last several days, is oftentimes doctors will schedule lunches with pharmaceutical reps because that is the time that they have during the day that they can actually talk or interact with individuals. They don't want to stop their day as they're seeing patients. They want to flow through their patients, and then once they stop for lunch, they'll interact with the sales representative. Oftentimes at lunch, you still are getting maybe 5-10 minutes with the provider, because oftentimes at lunch they're following up on their notes, their dictation or whatever. So it is and then other times you can get more time. The doctor will provide more time for the sales representative. But again, I think it's really important to reiterate that it is the choice of the physician whether or not he sees a sales representative, and whether or not that sales representative provides him important information for him to make appropriate clinical decisions for his patients.
And are your sales representatives, were you trained to discuss the risks and benefits of the medicines you detailed with the physician?
Yes.
Did any of the materials that you left behind with the physician contain that safety information?
Yes, all of the promotional materials always balance the benefits and the risks.
Now, you were asked in direct about calling on high prescribers. Do you remember that?
I do, yes.
Why would you do that?
So again, whenever you're looking at a therapeutic area, you look at who are the clinicians who are prescribing the drugs in your class. It would make no sense for me to, if I had a cardiac drug, to promote that to an OBGYN, because an OBGYN is not going to provide the cardiac medications for their patients in that sense. So we always look at the appropriate specialties where are what we call a market basket, that is the drugs that are promoted in this area. In this case, this would be the Schedule II opioids, and for Duragesic and Nucynta ER, that would be Schedule II long-acting opioids. And we would look at providers who are already using those medications, because those are the folks who have experience with these medications, and those are the folks who are likely seeing the patients who are appropriate for our medications. So that's how we determine who it is that we're calling on. We're looking at the specialty that's appropriate, and then we're looking at those individuals who are already writing products in this area.
Can a sales representative write a prescription for a patient?
No. Not unless they are a licensed clinician.
Are sales representatives making the prescribing decision for the doctor?
No.
Are you in the exam rooms when doctors meet and discuss these issues with their patients?
No.
Now, ultimately, I assume you want a physician to use your product?
Yes.
In the case of Nucynta, you were on the team for Nucynta ER.
Yes.
Why would you want a doctor to use Nucynta ER?
Well, again, we would present the benefits and risks of Nucynta ER, and Nucynta ER was, we felt it was a great drug. It is as I described before, it's not a pure mu opioid. The analgesia that it provided was like that of a pure mu opioid. In clinical trials, it performed extremely well. We couldn't promote the tamper-resistant formulation, but we knew it was there, and we felt it was a better drug than what the drugs were on the market at the time.
We showed a slide in opening about influences on doctors. Do you remember that?
Maybe? Oh, yes. Yes, I do. Now I remember.
That picture?
Yes.
Remember that
Yes,
one?
I do.
Janice, can you throw that one up, please? When you call on a physician, do you understand that that physician has been to medical school,
Yes.
that he has been involved in continuing medical education,
Yes.
that he has access to other physicians,
Yes.
he has clinical experience,
Yes.
access to textbooks and literature,
Yes.
and access to the FDA labels that the court so patiently listened to us read this morning.
Yes.
You understand that doctor or physician is licensed by his state medical board?
Objection, Your Honor. I'm not sure who this faceless doctor is, and are we talking about opioid experience? I think it's very misleading that we're not having this in context. Is this an Oklahoma doctor?
I don't know that the doctor has a face for a reason, Brad. Maybe he looks a lot like you, but
Too handsome, I guess.
you're too handsome for him, I think.
Your Honor, the point
It's
of
a
objection is-
demonstrative, Your Honor.
But we're asking questions about some alleged mythical doctor. We don't know what state he's in or even what drug we're talking about.
Well, I haven't gone to a specific drug yet, Brad, because this applies to all of them, but I'd like to point out that since he's under the Oklahoma Medical Association, we can make him an Oklahoma doctor if you want.
Does that address your concern?
Yes, Your Honor. Well, not really. I object to using a demonstrative that doesn't, it's just, there's no context to it. I don't know if we're talking about, for example, Ms. DeMeschwitz talked about working on a hepatitis C drug, and we know that Hep C is a direct result of the increase in opioid intravenous use problem we have that was caused by oversupplying opioids. So I don't know if we're talking about that, which she detailed. She never worked as a sales rep for opioids, I don't think. So I don't know. It's just, I'm not sure what we're talking about here, so I'd like to have some clarification.
Well, ask Mr. Ottaway to maybe ask a few more questions to.
I'll be happy to ask some more questions about our friend up on the board there, Your Honor. Let's assume, Ms. D. Meshelman, that this is a doctor educated in a medical school with a residency behind him. I guess we should have put the stethoscope on her and reversed them, because they can certainly be hims or hers, can't they?
Yes.
You've called on both.
Yes.
A doctor here in Oklahoma would be licensed by the Oklahoma board.
Yes.
And if he had a license to prescribe opioids, he'd have a DEA license, which is something else entirely, isn't it?
Yes.
But let's just talk about your experience in any of the areas in which you did detailing, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And we'll go back and talk about all of the things I just asked you were true in that area, correct?
Yes.
Are they also true of a doctor who would be in a different therapeutic area, such as pain management?
Yes.
Now, down at the bottom is sales representative, right?
Yes.
So when the doctor sees a patient, there's an interaction between the two, correct?
Yes.
And he brings his knowledge, the knowledge in the medical community, the knowledge contained in the labels, his clinical experience, all the things up there to bear on the patient's concerns, symptoms, and medical history.
Yes.
Well, why would this doctor even agree to see a sales representative? What's their motivation? Some do, some don't, I take it?
Yes.
You've
Some
already
do,
said
some
that.
don't.
What's the motivation of a physician who interacts with a sales representative, just from your standpoint?
Objection, Your Honor, I don't know how they would know the motivation of the nameless doctor to have a sales rep come in and get gifts and lunches and things like that. I think we have to talk about specific doctors that they.
I asked her about ones that she had interactions with in her detail.
I object to questions about hypothetical doctors who aren't in Oklahoma. This witness has never detailed a doctor in Oklahoma with opioids, ever. And she's never detailed a doctor registered to prescribe a deadly Schedule II narcotic in the state of Oklahoma. So this is rank speculation. It has nothing to do with this.
Gee, and there I thought he had represented to me he would not object, and there it is. I'm asking you, ma'am, in your experience.
Sustain the objection.
In your experience, do you understand that?
Objection was sustained.
She can testify to her personal
Yeah,
experience.
her personal experience. That's what limit this down to your own detailing experience, okay?
Mhm.
In your own detailed experience.
So in my personal experience.
Yes, in your personal experience.
In my personal experience, when I was a sales representative, as well as a district manager, and even currently as a region business director, I believe that the reason that doctors see sales representatives is to stay current on current medications. Our role is to educate providers around the benefits and risks about our medications. We're not there to educate the doctor on how to treat, or how to diagnose. That's what they learn in these other areas, the medical school and things like that. But what they do depend on, oftentimes, a sales representative, is around the education specific to the different medications.
And in your personal experience, ma'am, besides meeting with sales representatives, what else did doctors do to educate themselves about the medications they would be prescribing in their therapeutic area?
So, again, it's much of what we have up here. Oftentimes, physicians will interact with sales representatives, but oftentimes they prefer to hear the information from a peer. So that is why we engage oftentimes with speaker programs. So a speaker is trained by our organization to stay consistent with the label, the speaker program, and all of the information. The deck goes through our PRC process, but oftentimes physicians like to hear the information from a peer, from a colleague, so that they better understand the clinical data itself and potentially can ask them questions because of their clinical experience. So they may engage with peer-to-peer. They may ask colleagues outside of, Janssen, different information as well. And I also know that oftentimes they will partake in CMEs. They're required to partake in CMEs. So oftentimes they will look to CMEs for education outside of the drug, because CMEs aren't promotional in nature or product specific. They're more disease state, management of a disease state. They're oriented more toward that. And so they'll partake in those types of educational sessions to keep abreast of things that are happening in the market or in their community.
And we'll touch on more detail on those two specific programs as we go forward. But you were also asked a number of questions in direct examination about something called call notes. Can you tell or remind Judge Bachman, if he could ever forget, what a call note is?
So a call note is prior, a call note was just something that the sales reps would write down. It oftentimes wasn't the complete call. It was just a few things that they may have discussed with the provider, that they recorded that a call took place.
And did you make call notes yourself?
I did.
What is the general purpose of making a call note?
Generally speaking, it's more around that call continuum. What did I do in this call? What do I need to do in the next call? It's more of like that, so that the interaction between you, you're determining what it is that we need to address the next time we interact with the clinician.
And as we've discovered, those notes are kept.
Yes?
Now, there's been some discussion about a change in your system for call notes.
Yes.
Can you explain to Judge Bachman, please, exactly what that change was and your understanding of it?
So the system itself was changed, and one of the reasons that it was changed is so that back at the home office, marketing could better understand what the sales representatives were using. So what resource were they using to interact with the clinician? What messages they were delivering to the clinician. So was the clinician very keyed in on the efficacy associated with this trial? And did the sales rep talk about that trial? Did the sales representative talk primarily about the side effect profile? Those are all included in this new system, the drop-down system, so that it's much more automated, that we can very quickly automate, do analysis on what messages are being delivered, what messages are resonating, and so that type of analysis is much quicker now.
I am a technological dinosaur. I do not assume that Judge Bachman is, but when you say drop-down system, can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so that is when you click on something, you know, a little icon that usually looks like a down arrow, you know what I'm talking about, right? And then the decision, you know, like you can determine what it is. In this case, you know, what did we focus in on? So that would be like a click, and there might be multiple like areas where the rep can click on what they did talk about. And then there is usually another drop down that talks to what resource did they use. So did they use the sales aid? What piece of the sales aid did they use? There's different things that they can then record that we can go back and analyze
And
collectively.
In the call notes that Mr. Beckworth went over with you, there was comments, opinions expressed by sales reps under this new system. How would they do that?
So the comments and things like that, there's not usually those comments are written, because they can record those in those drop downs. Like, I did this message, I did that message, and then they can automate
Let's say
that.
there wasn't a drop down selection that fit into something they wanted to express. Was there like an empty box or a write-in portion where they can include other comments if they wanted to?
That I don't believe so, no.
This system changed, I think you testified earlier, in 2009, maybe?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And are the results of the drop-downs maintained?
Do you mean, do we look at those?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
So the same way the old call note system would maintain, the new call note system would maintain the results of the drop-down?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Your Honor, I'm in a changing subject place. If you want to take a break, or if you want to...
Sure, let's go ahead and break now. Let's start up again at 3:10.
wade into that. It's pretty fair speculation.
Do people still buy books?
I know,
My daughter rents them online.
exactly.
You ready, Angie? You ready, Your Honor?
Yes.
We were just talking about call notes, and several of the call notes that were mentioned and discussed with you by State's counsel involved a product called Ultram or Ultraset.
Yes,
Are you familiar with that product?
I am.
Is it a Janssen product?
It is a Janssen product.
Is it a scheduled opioid?
It is a scheduled opioid now.
And it is scheduled at what level?
It is currently a Schedule 4.
Janice, can you put up Schedule 4 for the court, please? Can you tell us, and Judge Boughton, what a Schedule 4 opioid is?
So it's Schedule 4 is the drug or other substance has a low potential for abuse relative to drugs or other substances in Schedule 3.
Now, let's just compare it to another drug, Lortab.
Yes?
What is Lortab?
So Loratab is a hydrocodone medication, a short-acting, along with acetaminophen, referred to as another term, I should say, or another name is Vicodin or Norco.
And is it a scheduled opioid?
It is a, well, it was a Schedule 3. It has been upscheduled to a Schedule 2 now.
And the lower you go on that scale, the more abuse potential the drug has?
Yes.
So again, Ultram or Ultraset would be Schedule 4,
It is a Schedule 4 now, yes.
and Lortab or Vicodin would be Schedule 2.
It was a Schedule 3, now it's a Schedule 2.
When I say Ultraset, what does that mean?
So Ultraset was a combination of tramadol plus acetaminophen. It was a short-acting opioid for a very short period of time, indicated for.
And I believe we have an Ultraset label in one of our exhibits. I don't want to burden the court with the entire exhibit. It's J444. And I have just pulled out the Ultraset portion of that exhibit. Portion of exhibit J444. Your Honor, there's a reference in the book. It starts at page 133. Can you identify that, ma'am?
I can, yes.
And can you let the court know what it is?
So this is the FDA label for Ultraset. And at the top, well, on the one side, it has the black box warning.
I would offer pages 133 through 179 of Exhibit 444 into evidence at this time.
Your Honor, the state does not object, provided that Janssen states for the record the actual year that this label is. I believe this is after September 2018.
I think it's 817.
Well, we have recent major changes, September 2018 on the bottom left, so I'm not sure how it would be before that, but that's why I make sure it's
That's
clear.
what I'm looking at for you, Mr. Beckworth, and we will put into the record which label it is precisely. As I said, the last page indicates issue 817. Mr. Beckworth says there's a portion that has an update in 18, but we'll figure it out.
I'll admit Janssen 444, subject to providing that additional information.
Thank you.
Now, ma'am, this is the first page of this particular label, which is page 133 of another exhibit.
Yes.
And again, can you tell Judge Bachman what it is?
So again, this is the FDA-approved label for Ultraset.
If I can get you to look at you've already told us it has the black box warning on the left. If I can direct your attention to the right-hand page,
Yes,
there is a section there called Limitations of Use. Do you see it?
I do.
Would you read that for the court? The limitations of use for Ultraset.
So it states that Ultraset tablets are indicated for short-term use of 5 days or less.
And I'm sorry, I may have asked this, or you may have said it already. Ultraset, what's the set at the end mean?
So again, this is tramadol plus acetaminophen.
Last week, or while you were being questioned at some point by State's counsel, there were some notes, call notes that reflected sprains and strains. Do you remember that?
I do, yes.
What reason would a sales representative have for recommending Ultraset before the administration of Lortab?
So again, as we just talked about, this, if the doctor is considering Lortab for a patient, the whole concept was use a lower scheduled drug, or in this case, a Schedule 4 drug, before you go to a Schedule 3 drug if you deem that appropriate for that patient. So that was the concept.
Because it's not as addictive?
Well, it's not as addictive, it's not as strong. You already recognize that other forms of medications are not, they're not alleviating the pain, so you're going to a stronger drug. Why not go start with Ultraset and then move up if you need to from there?
And as we've already said, Ultraset is indicated for short-term use, 5 days or less, correct?
Correct.
And do you believe it was appropriate for a sales representative to make that recommendation?
Yes.
Now, we've talked about call notes a little. You were also questioned about call plans.
Yes.
Can you tell Judge Bachman what a call plan is?
So a call plan is, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, as far as a call plan are the number of calls associated with different doctors in a sales representative's area. So we call it their call plan. Those are the physicians who have been identified that they should make calls on, and there are a number of calls associated with each individual doctor.
Who creates this call plan?
So that is based on IMS data, so it's based on the clinician's prescribing habits, how busy they are, the number of patients that they see in the area that we are engaged in. And along with that IMS data, there's an organization back at our company called the Business Analytics Group that would take that data, analyze it, determine in a geographical area how many, based on the number of physicians that are in that area, how many sales representatives should be in that area, and then their call plan is the calls on each of those individual providers. Does that make sense?
And is that business analytics group the same group that keeps track of the pull downs on the call notes, or is that done by somebody else?
No, that would also be the business analytics team.
Okay. So, can you explain why one specialty might appear on a call plan and another would not?
So again, it's based on the therapeutic area in which the clinician practices. So in this case, in pain management, we would look at those providers who were prescribing long-acting opioids. And in this case, we saw in a previous slide where the majority of those physicians fell into pain specialists, primary care physicians, and again, these are primary care physicians that have opted to treat pain, and oncologists. So those are the three primary that our sales forces are calling on.
Now, there's a call plan. Is there also the opposite of that, a do not call plan?
There is a do not call list that is associated with specialty. So those are specialties that would not be, or they're deemed not appropriate for a sales representative to call on.
Can you give us some examples?
So, for instance, the one that always comes to my mind is like veterinarians, because veterinarians, believe it or not, oftentimes will use opioids to, with analgesia with animals. Oftentimes, let's see, ophthalmologists, so eye doctors, that is an appropriate dentist, because dentists are very short-term. So again, those are just some examples of the specialties that would be on our do not call list for the long-acting opioids.
And how often are call plans generated?
Quarterly,
Do sales representatives have input in their call plans?
they do. They do. Oftentimes, there's changes in a geographical area. Clinicians will move, clinicians will retire. Unfortunately, some may die. And so the sales representative has an opportunity to, from a local market knowledge perspective, update that call plan and submit those requests in to make those changes on that quarterly basis.
And can a doctor be removed from a call plan?
They can, yes.
And who can do that and how?
So again, a sales representative would submit that request into the sales operations team, and the sales operation team then would send that to the a group within the business analytics team to make those changes.
And what reasons might be given for removing someone from the call plan?
As I said before, if a physician, moves, they retire, they change their focus of practice, so there's a multitude of reasons.
Is there like a chain of command you go through?
So again, the sales representative would submit that to their district manager would then submit up through the region business director, who then would submit that into the sales operations team and forward from there.
Thank you. How are Janssen sales representatives paid?
So the compensation plan for a sales representative, they are given a base compensation, which usually is between 75 and 80% of their total compensation. And then on top of that, they get an over-base compensation, which is is part of their incentive compensation plan.
How is that base compensation portion of the salary determined?
So at the hiring, there is a, Janssen, like all companies, do and continue to look at fair market value. So they will look at what sales representatives across the pharmaceutical industry are being paid. They'll look at their experience within the industry or outside of the industry and determine what that salary range is like. And then each year, based on their performance, based on different things, they are provided merit increases. So initially, or when they first begin, it's based on a fair market value.
And how does this compare with the incentive portion of the plan that you told the judge about?
So again, the base compensation is the primary. That base is the primary portion. It's, like I said before, between 75 and 80% of their total compensation.
How is that incentive compensation actually calculated?
So it is based on, depending on where you are in the market. At launch, it may be different than a product that's been in the market for several years. And that is determined by prescription sales. So how are they, are they selling the prescription that they are, or I should say, the medication that they're educating the doctor on. And oftentimes at the beginning, when a drug is just launched, that's based on pure volume of scripts, number of scripts, because you're basically starting from zero and you are, the number of scripts is evaluated. When you're in the market for a period of time, you may shift over to market share. So what percentage of the market share do you have compared to the others in that market?
When someone talks about increasing market share in your business, what does that mean to you?
So you are, as I said before, you're differentiating your product versus the competition. And what you're trying to do is you want, based on the benefits and risks associated with your medication, you want the doctor to prescribe your drug instead of the competition. You're trying to, for lack of a better word, like steal the market share from the competition. You want them to use your drug more than the competitions, or instead of the competitions.
Was increasing the total market for opioid products ever a part of Janssen's incentive plan?
No, in fact, across both Duragesic and Nucynta, we were calling on prescribers who were already writing long-acting opioids, and our goal was for them to write our product instead of if they were going to write the competition.
Now, you've described to Judge Botman the compensation and incentive plans that would have applied in the pain area. Is that compensation determined the same across all therapeutic areas at Janssen?
Yes, very similar, yes.
We've had some discussion in your direct exam, ma'am, about speakers bureaus. Remember that?
Yes.
And one of the roles of sales representative was to arrange those programs or identify potential speakers, correct?
Sometimes, yes.
Tell the court how if there was input, how that would occur.
For a speaker?
Yes.
So oftentimes, as we've talked about in the past, thought leaders in an area are identified in the community. So oftentimes, speakers will be identified through different means, but in the case of if a sales representative identifies an individual, it is an individual that is usually well respected in their geographical area. It is an individual that is articulate, that is a good communicator, and usually has some experience with the product.
And why does Janssen use speakers bureaus?
So I think it's important to understand across the pharmaceutical industry, peer-to-peer is used often. And we discussed this a little bit earlier as far as oftentimes a clinician likes to or prefers to gain their information, their education through a peer or a colleague. And so Janssen will partake in speaker programs to, again, facilitate that education between a peer to another peer. So oftentimes, like I said, a doctor wants to gain that information, that education through a peer, and that's why we provide that education in that manner.
Is this unique to the pain franchise, or does the creation and use of Speakers Bureau apply to all of Janssen's therapeutic area?
Yeah, like I said, it applies across the pharmaceutical industry, across multiple therapeutic areas.
Now, you've gone into a little bit about how a speaker might be selected. Is there anything more you need to add to fill out Judge Bachman's understanding of that?
About how a speaker may be identified?
Yes.
So oftentimes a speaker may be identified through interactions with one of our scientific liaisons. Oftentimes if a doctor raises their hand, has a question that is outside of the educational understanding of the sales representative, the sales representative can send in what we call a medical information request, and that clinician may ask the clinician asks a question, then one of our scientific liaisons can come out and usually our scientific liaisons are PharmDs. They can have that clinical interaction and answer the question that the physician may have. Oftentimes in those clinical exchanges, they may identify, the MSL, the scientific liaison, may identify a physician who is very engaged in the subject matter within the therapeutic area and within the specific, the drug the questions are having, and may identify them as someone who may, with their understanding, may benefit others.
Despite what therapeutic area you are in, are there eligibility requirements for someone to be on a Janssen Speakers Bureau?
So yes, there are.
Can you tell Judge Bachman what that would be?
So they have to be in, so they have to be articulate, as I said before. They need to be obviously licensed. And there's also, and I'm not sure how I describe this, but they must be in good standings. In other words, they can't be, there's a check in like DOJ and things like that that determines that they're not being investigated or anything like that.
And does this apply to everyone in every therapeutic area that appears on a Speakers Bureau?
Yes.
Now, are Speakers Bureau people trained?
Yes, they are.
Can you tell Judge Bachman how that would occur?
So all of and we talked about this earlier this morning, all of the speaker materials, the resource, the speaker deck itself, but also all of the training goes through that rigorous PRC process, the promotional review process, and it's approved through our process. Then speakers are trained on the information on the deck that is provided to them, that is consistent with our label, that they provide this information specific to the label. They are trained on what they can and can't do, and again, specifically on the data that we are asking them to present.
There is a speaker's training deck already in evidence, Your Honor. It is State 2376. With the court's permission, you've already seen one of those exhibits because I had it marked as a court exhibit. But if I could pull up 2376 and have the witness discuss several parts of it.
Sure.
What are we looking at now?
So this looks like it is the Nucynta ER speaker training from October 2012.
And when I look under Nucynta, I see tapentadol. Is that unique molecule you discussed earlier in your testimony?
Yes.
The date of this particular deck that we pulled out the Court Exhibit 6 on is October the 10th, 2012. Is that correct?
Yes.
And down at the bottom it says what? Very bottom.
Please see full prescribing information, including boxed warning, available at this event.
Is full prescribing information, including boxed warning, always available at Speakers Bureau's events?
Yes, it is. And this would be another word for the full prescribing information is the FDA-approved label.
Now I get confused. Speakers Bureau's CMEs, are they the same thing?
No.
Is there something in this training that explains the difference?
Yes.
Can you go to page 12, Janice? This slide is actually contained within the deck that is State 2376. And can you explain to Judge Bachman why a speaker program is different than a CME?
Yes, so a promotional speaker program is specific to the drug. So it is promotional in nature. The company, meaning at this point Janssen, owns the content development, the conduct, and the implementation of it. The materials, as we've discussed, are reviewed and approved through the PRC process before being shared with customers, and it is all submitted to the FDA. And these, it's highlighted here in red, none of these materials should be used for CME or CE programs. The difference with CME, so this is continuing medical education programs. These are educational programs that obviously a clinician gets credit for in maintaining their medical license. That must be independent of influence in content and conduct. And what that means is we, as the company, or even if we are funding, we must be independent of influence in content and conduct. We have nothing to do with content. And the FDA recognizes the critical role of industry sponsorship, meaning support of that, financial support, of scientifically sound educational activities that are independent of commercial influence and non-promotional. So what that means is, again, commercial influence, we are funding these programs, we are supporting them, but we have no influence on the conduct, on the content. And these are not regulated by the FDA.
Are there FDA requirements for promotional presentations such as speaker programs?
So yes, they are consistent with the label.
Janice, can you bring up page 17? This is actually, again, part of the speaker's training deck. Can you tell Judge Bachman what the FDA requirements that are taught to speakers at speakers bureaus are?
Right. So again, understand, these are promotional presentations. These are branded. They must include the discussion of the FDA-approved indications only. Efficacy and dosing information should be consistent with the FDA-approved prescribing information, that is the FDA-approved label. You'll also hear that the PI, or the prescribing information, is the FDA label, and supported by substantial evidence. The relative safety information, including appropriate warnings, contraindications, precautions, and adverse reactions. So the scope, depth, and detail will depend on the nature of the efficacy discussion.
And read there what's bolded below and at the bottom.
That the full prescribing information, again, the full FDA label for the promoted product, must be made available at the program for the audience members.
All right, let's go to page 18. Janice? What is this?
So this is the direction that the promotional speakers must remain on label, provide information that's
What do you mean on label?
so consistent with the label.
Okay.
What's in the FDA-approved label.
Go ahead, I'm sorry, I interrupted.
The promotional speakers must provide information that's truthful and not false or misleading. They must provide fair balance with product risk and benefit. Only use the slide deck that's approved and provided by the company. So the speaker can't manipulate the slide deck. They can't delete slides. They can't add slides. They have to stick to the approved slide deck that is provided to them. And they are not to solicit off-label inquiries. So they can't try to, get people to ask them questions that are off-label.
Go to page 42, please, Janice. This is a summary of what we've just learned. Can you tell us what we just learned that's in this summary?
So again, as I talked about this, the slide decks are approved through the PRC process, And so it's important that the speaker knows that they are to stay within the parameters of those approved messages. So the summary here shows that the speakers are to utilize only company-approved slides and materials. They are to discuss only approved uses, dosages, and durations. Again, not solicit off-label questions or inquiries. All the information must be truthful and not false or misleading. They should make no claims, comparative or otherwise, that are not supported by the product's package insert or the FDA label. They need to discuss the important safety information. As painful it is for them and the audience members, they do have to go through the important safety information. They are to never minimize any of the potential safety information, and they need to handle unsolicited requests for off-label information according to the company policy.
Now, do they disclose the fact that they are being trained in this promotional role?
Yes, they do disclose that they have been trained on this material and that they are receiving funding for their time.
Can you bring up 65, please, Janice? I can't read it. There you go. Go ahead, if you can tell us what we're looking at.
So this is the, basically the disclaimer that would be on the deck, that this promotional education activity is brought to you by Janssen Pharmaceutical, Inc., and is not certified for continuing medical education. The speaker is a paid consultant presenting on behalf of Janssen Pharmaceuticals, Inc., and must present information in compliance with FDA requirements applicable to Janssen Pharmaceuticals, Inc.
Now, if we can just, at the end, go to page 104, you mentioned safety information. What do we have here?
So this is the important safety information that, that the speaker would have to go through during their presentation.
And is there's anything on the bottom of that? You have warnings and precautions, and what was on the bottom of the page, Jim? If anything? Warnings and precautions there even below the black box part?
Yes.
Okay. After a speaker has been approved and trained according to this deck, what happens next?
So once the speaker is trained and approved, they will engage with a speaker agency that coordinates, it's like a project manager, coordinates speaker engagements. The sales representatives will conduct those speaker engagements through the company that is basically, they are, how will I say, managing the speaker's bureau and the speaker's budget.
Now, does anybody make sure all this is adhered to?
Yes.
How is that done?
So during the course of a speaker presentation, if a speaker goes off script, or if a speaker does something that is non-compliant, that speaker would be, or that situation would be alerted to the marketing team, and the marketing team would address it.
Are all of the materials presented at these speakers' bureaus, do they go through PRC review?
They
As you
do.
described earlier?
Yes, they do.
Ma'am, I'll hand you what's been marked as J3349 and ask if you can identify it for Angie and Judge Bachman there.
J3349 is an actual Nucynta speaker deck.
And can you give me the date on that deck? We were
It
just
is
looking at something in 2012, but we actually have a speaker's deck here from what year?
May 2010.
we would offer this exhibit into evidence, Your Honor. 3349.
Okay.
3349 will be admitted into the evidence.
Thank you, Judge. Can you tell us what this is and what topics it covers?
So again, this is a Nucynta, so the immediate release speaker deck from May 2010.
There's that tapentadol molecule again,
Yes?
and at the bottom, what does it say?
Please see full prescribing information available at this event.
Okay, is there a table of contents or something that would allow you to tell Judge Bachman what is covered at this speaker's event?
I have to check.
You're free to go through it.
It's up front, it's going through the different mechanisms of, the mechanism of action, the thought to be mechanism of action, the role that each of those mechanisms play.
Kind of as
Then-
you described to Judge Bachman earlier today, but in more detail.
Yes, yes. And then it moves into the specific indication of Nucynta, how to dose Nucynta, and then it goes into the clinical data, the different clinical phase 3 studies associated with tapentadol IR or Nucynta.
Are adverse effects or safety referenced in the speaker's bureau deck?
Yes, so the analgesic efficacy is outlined for each of the trials, as well as the side effects associated with each of the trials.
You've been going through several pages there. At the bottom of each page that you've gone through, what is reflected?
Yes?
At the very bottom of each page, is there something on there?
Please see full prescribing information available at this event.
Now, you mentioned safety information is included in the deck. Can you go to page 22, Janice, of this deck, please? Is this the safety information that you told Judge Bachman was included?
So this is the important safety information that is included in the deck. Yes?
And let's go to page, just flip through to 23, 24.
This is what I mentioned before, how it is painstakingly difficult for a physician, as well as those in the audience, for them to go through this information.
Let's talk about slide 25, where we were. Sorry, I can't read that one. There you go, 25. Now I can read it. Can you tell me what this slide is dedicated to at page 25?
So this is talking about Nucynta is a mu opioid agonist and is a Schedule II controlled substance. Such drugs are sought by drug abusers and people with addiction disorders. Diversion of Schedule II products is an act subject to criminal penalty. Nucynta can be abused in a manner similar to other mu opioid agonists, legal or illicit. This should be considered when prescribing or dispensing Nucynta in situations where the physician or pharmacist is concerned about an additional risk of misuse and abuse. All patients treated with mu opioid agonists require careful monitoring for signs of abuse and addiction. Nucynta may be abused by crushing, chewing, snorting, or injecting the product. These practices pose a significant risk to the abusers that could result in overdose and death.
Now, we've already determined that safety information like this is contained in different places in this speaker's deck. Did the speakers actually have to present this information, or could they just blow by it?
As I said before, Judge, this is the part where it's painstaking for both the speaker as well as those in attendance, where the speaker would have to go through this.
Are people who engage in speakers bureaus compensated in some way?
So those who provide the speaking, they are paid an honorarium based on their time.
And there may have already been an exhibit about this, but how is that compensation determined, this honorarium for their time?
So that is a fair market value that is determined by our procurement group along with our healthcare compliance group to determine a fair market value based on, again, on the time associated with that thought leader.
Does fair market value mean the same thing for a speaker at a speakers bureau as it does for a key opinion leader or someone who is asked to serve on an advisory board for the company?
Again, yes, the fair market value would be based on the qualifications of that individual, their multitude of their level of, where they are from a thought leader perspective. If they are a national thought leader, their honorarium is likely going to be higher than those who are more known in their local community.
Was there a cap on what speakers could earn?
So yes, there was.
And can you tell Judge Bachman, back in the time frame we're talking about, 10 and 12, what that cap was?
The cap is $50,000.
And did speakers hit this cap often in your experience?
Not often. There may be times where there's an exception that takes place, where a speaker may go beyond that because they may be involved in a project. Likely those are more like the folks who are considered national KOLs, who may be engaged in multiple products over a year's time frame. But again, that would have to be an exception, and it would have to be approved through the healthcare compliance process.
Were these honorarium in any way rewards for high prescribers?
No.
And were these speakers recruited, trained, and compensated across all therapeutic areas within the company?
Yes.
Your Honor has heard discussion of KOLs. What is a KOL now?
So a KOL stands for Key Opinion Leader, and as I would describe it, that is a thought leader in the community in which they practice medicine, in the world of pharmaceuticals that we're talking about. They are a thought leader in the community in which they practice medicine.
What therapeutic areas use thought leaders or key opinion leaders?
So there are key opinion leaders across all therapeutic areas. There are key opinion leaders in, cardiology. There are thought leaders in oncology. There are thought leaders across all therapeutic areas. Again, based on the community in which they practice medicine, that community determines who is and who isn't, considered a thought leader.
Are the use of key opinion leaders, is that use a long-standing practice?
Yes.
Is it common to all pharmaceutical companies?
Yes.
Now, why does Janssen work with key opinion leaders?
Well, because key opinion leaders, as I've said, they are the thought leaders in their therapeutic area. They are the individuals who are highly respected by the members in that community. And again, as I term community, I mean the practice of medicine in that therapeutic area. And so oftentimes we will engage with these individuals because they are very well educated. They are they understand the area that they are in, and likely they're highly published in this area, and they can offer advice and consultation in areas that we may need or want their opinion on.
I used a slide, I think, in opening. That look familiar?
Yes?
And is this helpful to you in explaining how key opinion leaders are identified?
Yes, please.
Can you put that up, please, with the court's permission? I'll give a copy to the court as my
Yes.
court's exhibit next. And would you just tell, may I approach your office?
Yes, you may. 23?
Mrs. Fisher assures me it's 23. I'm sorry, ma'am, I interrupted. Go ahead.
No, so this is illustrative of how we would identify a key opinion leader. So if you are approaching a brand new therapeutic area and you want to better understand who those thought leaders are in that area, there's multitude of ways that you can understand who those thought leaders are. We have in the past done surveys out to clinicians. This is like a market research type of approach where you send market research surveys out to identify who are those individuals within your field of medicine that you look to for their opinions at a national level, at a regional level, and at a local level. And so those surveys will go out and you can identify, or it will help you identify where those individuals may be. You also have your scientific liaisons who are in the field. Our scientific liaisons are geographically located, and so they have insight into that geographical area of the different individuals who are in academics and are engaged in that, like I said, field of study. So they have insights as well. We also may look at engaging with a consulting company that reviews the literature to understand who is publishing, who is active in publishing, who's basically doing the research in that therapeutic area. So we would review that. There's input from consultants in the therapeutic area, so we may engage with a consultant that's got experience in that therapeutic area and they have an understanding of that. And then we would engage with meetings with some of those potential KOLs to identify different folks.
Ms. Dean Eshelman, does Janssen only work with KOLs who it agrees with?
No, not
Does
at all.
it always agree with its KOL?
No, sometimes we agree to disagree, so.
Are KOLs compensated?
They are when they're engaged with us. Again, it goes back to that fair market value. If we're engaged with a KOL, we would compensate them for their time.
Does Janssen have internal written policies that cover the use of KOLs?
Yes.
I'm going to hand you what has been marked as J2342.
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
Adding to your stack, adding Mr. Beckler's stack. You're welcome. And I'll ask if you can identify this document.
So this is a HCC, so a healthcare compliance document. It's a guidance document, and I believe we're going to focus in on the contracting document.
We would move 2342 into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
Jansen. 2342, thank you. 2342, admitted into the evidence.
And does this document talk about how contracting key opinion leaders or others are used?
Yes.
Can you reference the page for me that you want to talk about? We've talked about pages 5 and 3, but you tell me where you want to go.
So on page 0005.
Janice, can you put up that page for me? Thank you. And what is it about this page, if anything, that you want to bring to the court's attention?
So again, the purpose of this healthcare compliance document is that it shows us the policy on master agreements and general contracting. So the question is do we have policies and procedures specific to the engagement with key opinion leaders? And if you go down to the center there that talks to the contracting policy, so the contracting policy defines the standard and policies associated with interactions where a U.S. customer is in attendance and/or where activity invokes one of the core safe harbors. And the safe harbors include but are not limited to advisory boards, which we've talked about a little bit over the course of the last several days. That is an area where a key opinion leader would be involved in an advisory board setting. Speaker training and speaker programs, so speaker bureaus, again, key opinion leaders will likely be engaged there. Project consulting, that again is an area where a key opinion leader may engage with us on a specific project, educational in nature. There is service agreements, educational grants. So all of that is outlined here as far as what this contracting policy addresses.
And in this policy, is there also discussion about various laws and rules and regulations that must be complied with?
Yes, and those are on 0003.
Could you bring up that page, Ms. Conway, for her? And what is it you want us to focus on there, Ms. Demishl?
The laws and standards that include, and the bullet points towards the top, yes.
All right, right there. Just tell Judge Bachman what we're looking at.
So these laws and standards would include the anti-kickback laws, false claims and other billing standards, the FDA advertising rules, the state profession practice laws, the American Medical Association or the AMA guidelines on gifts to physicians from industry, the Pharma Code on interactions with healthcare professionals, and the Accreditation Council for Continuing Medical Education Standards for commercial support of continuing medical education, as well as the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practice Act. I'm sorry, the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act.
And if you want to get a drink of water, this is a good time because I'm going to take a breath and move on to another topic. So if you need one, please feel free to take one. We will turn to something that we compared to speakers bureaus a few moments ago, and that's continuing medical education program.
Okay.
CME. Remember that topic?
I do.
Last week, you were asked about Janssen's funding of CME events. You may have already answered this, but can you tell us for the record what CME stands for?
So that would stand for continuing medical education.
And who partakes of this continuing medical education?
So continuing medical education is required by not only physicians but pharmacists to continue their medical licensing. And so this is education that they need to partake in over a course of a year, multiple, I don't know what their requirements are specifically, but.
People in the well here are painfully aware of CLE requirements, but can you tell me who puts on CMEs?
So the CME, there is a provider of the CME. The provider of the CME are those that create the content itself. And then there are the CME accreditors. Those are accrediting organizations that review the materials, ensure that it is non-promotional type of content, and approve it for accreditation. So they're accreditors.
Is there an accreditation council that sets standards for this?
There is, yes.
Yet another acronym for the court reporters to become familiar with, ACCME. Can you tell us what that stands for, if you can?
No.
Good. I'll read it to you. The Accreditation Council for Continuing Medical Education. That sound familiar?
Yes, it does.
Well done. Yeah, there you go. You mentioned that all of these accreditors are in fact accredited themselves?
Yes, the accrediting, yes.
Could Janssen become an accredited CME provider?
No.
Or what kinds of education are provided to physicians during a CME?
So the CME education is, as we've discussed earlier, it is non-promotional in nature. It is not product specific. It is around a disease state. It may be specific to a topic in that therapeutic area that is needed. So it is an education. It is a purely an educational program for, in this case, for the medical individual.
Does Janssen support CME programs?
Yes, absolutely.
Can you tell Judge Bachman how Janssen does that?
So we would support CME programs through an educational grant. And so whenever a CME program comes in, the requester would send in a request for CME support around a specific project, a specific CME program. That is reviewed by a separate committee that would be, it is in the medical affairs area of our organization. And if that CME is in that therapeutic area and they deem it, appropriate, or they deem it that it is addressing an issue that is needed, they will approve the CME funding and provide that funding to the organization, the requester. But again, we agree, or we fund the program, but we have no influence on the content. And we aren't allowed to have influence on the content. That's part of the ACCME guidelines.
Now, the court has already heard evidence about one such program, NIPAC, how do you,
NPEC,
NPEC, and you remember what the grant to that program was?
how much it was?
Yes.
I do believe it was significant.
Yeah. Why would Janssen agree to provide an educational grant of that size or any size to fund a CME program it has no control over?
So whenever Janssen partakes in a therapeutic area, it goes back to our credo. And one of our strongholds in our credo is around supporting our community. And in any therapeutic area in which we engage, that's considered, the community in which we are engaging. And so it's very important that we support that community in the educational events that are required or that they need to partake in. It's a role that we feel is very, very important. Our sales representatives are not they don't have the role of educating a doctor on how to diagnose a patient, how to practice medicine. That isn't our role as a pharmaceutical company. Our role as a pharmaceutical company with our sales representatives is to educate the doctor around our specific product. And that's in that role of our promotional programs and the promotional role that our representatives play. But clinicians also need updated education around their therapeutic area and in the areas that I just spoke to. And we feel it's very important that we support them in that continuing medical education. And there are several situations where we have supported multiple continuing medical educations that we feel were very important in this therapeutic area, NPEC being one of those.
Now, you told us Janssen cannot dictate content. Can it require that certain speakers appear on the program?
No. Again, the guidelines clearly frame out that we have no influence on the content or the the speakers or the individuals who present that.
The court
Content.
here will listen to evidence about CMEs in the area of pain. Are these CME programs common across all therapeutic areas for Janssen?
Yes, absolutely.
And are they common for all companies like Janssen?
Yes.
Has Janssen ever supported any CMEs in the pain area in Oklahoma?
Yes.
And why did it do that?
Because again, as I spoke before, in the communities in which we serve, we believe that it's important to support continuing medical education.
Is there a process within Janssen to determine which CMEs it will provide grants to?
Again, as I said before, Judge, they do go through a process. They come in, the request comes in, and there is a group that reviews the CME, and that is part of our medical affairs department.
And are all of these done in compliance with rules set by the accrediting agent and the FDA?
Yes.
Apart from Janssen's internal rules, do CME accreditors require CMEs to follow certain rules?
Yes.
And let me, if I may,
Yes.
add to your burden once more with J490. We move on to the honor. Mr. Backward, can you tell the court what Exhibit J490 is?
So this is the Accreditation Council for Continuing Medical Education. You heard us speak prior about ACCME. These are the standards for commercial support. And basically, these are the standards to ensure that there's independence, again, that non-promotional piece to CME.
We would offer J490 into evidence.
Your Honor, we don't have any objection to using the rules of the road from ACC. Is this 2004?
This is a 2004 date, right?
Thank you. Yes, no objection.
J490 will be admitted into the evidence.
And ma'am, let me just refer you to, I think, page 2 there, and ask if what you have been discussing is reflected in that exhibit in standards 1 and 2.
Yes.
Can you point out to Judge Botman what those standards are and why they are supportive of your testimony?
So Judge, I call your attention to standard number 1, which is the area, it's on page 2, the area that talks about the independence. And it talks about that the CME provider, again, remember, there's a provider, the one that creates the content itself, and then there's the accreditor that actually reviews that material and determines that it is accredited.
Right.
Makes sense. So the CME provider must ensure that the following decisions were made free of the control of a commercial interest. So the ACCME defines a commercial interest as any proprietary entity producing healthcare goods or services with the exemption of nonprofit or government organizations and non-healthcare related companies, which, if we define that, that would be anyone with a commercial interest as a proprietary entity. That would be Janssen. That would be a commercial entity. So they have to make sure that that's independent. The identification of the CME needs, the determination of the educational objectives, the selection and presentation of content, which is what Mr. Ottaway asked me prior. Do we have any say in who presents the material? No. In content, no. Selection of all persons and organizations that will be in a position to control the content of the CME, selection of educational methods, and then the evaluation of the activity. we have to be free of that.
Standard 2 talks about the resolution of any personal conflicts of interest. Can you just, as an overview, give us what's meant by that?
So in the CME, there has to be a disclosure around who funds the CME, which is where you would see that Janssen Pharmaceutical funded this CME. But the speaker, anybody who is presenting this CME, also has to disclose their conflicts of interest as well.
And I refer you to Standard 5, ma'am, as we'll go through the rest of this document, and ask you what that standard discusses.
Standard 5 talks to the content and format without commercial bias. So it talks to the content or format of a CME activity or its related materials must promote improvements or quality in healthcare and not a specific proprietary business interests of a commercial interest. And presentations must give a balanced view of therapeutic options. Use of generic names will contribute to this impartiality. If the CME educational material or content includes trade names, where available, trade names from several companies should be used, not just trade names from a single company. So if there is a CME that is talking anything about medications, what they're saying here is the use of generics is better, but you have to ensure that it's not just one, that you're talking about all.
And finally, if I can draw your attention to 6.3, would you pull that out, Ms. Conway, for us? Tell Judge Bachman the importance of this provision.
So this is commercial support for the CME activity. Here it just frames out that the source of all support from commercial interest must be disclosed to learners, and when commercial support is in kind, the nature of the support must be disclosed to the learners. So disclosed is, the disclosure. Janssen Pharmaceutical funded this activity.
During your prior questioning, ma'am, Mr. Beckworth asked you about something called NPEC. Do you remember that?
I do, yes.
I believe that, so you won't have to remember yet another acronym, is the National Pain Education Council.
Yes.
What was the National Pain Education Council?
That was a council that was, that came together. The council, I believe, submitted requests for educational funding for multiple CME programs over the course of a few years to educate clinicians in the pain area.
Janice, can you bring up S0975 for us? This has been admitted, Your Honor, as a state exhibit. I think it was actually, it's RJ775. No, it's RJ, there it is, state 0975. Just, there you go.
Is it also a Janssen exhibit, or?
Well, we had it marked and they just got it in first. So that's all right.
It's the same exhibit, though.
Same exhibit,
It's J775.
or S0975. What is that? Whatever it's marked, whatever the number, what is it?
This is the NPEC Continuing Medical Education Program.
Now, CME is what we've been talking about, right? With all of these rules and regulations.
Yes.
And if we go to page 2, Ms. Conway, if you can highlight that so everyone can read it. There's that ACCME that we went through the rules just a second ago. Can you tell me what the top part of that says?
Yes, this is the disclosure that outlines that this activity is funded through an educational grant from Janssen Pharmaceutical Products, LP.
And was the content developed in accordance, according to this,
Yes,
with ACCME standards?
Yes, it says that the content was developed independently by the contributing faculty and that all materials are included with permission. All materials are included with permission.
And what's that last sentence?
The opinions expressed are those of the faculty and are not to be construed as those of the publisher or grantor.
And then the next sentence, in accordance with ACCME, essential areas and policies regarding commercial support, etc.
You want me to read that?
Did I read it correctly? I'm trying to give you a break.
Yes.
Okay. So who developed the content for this program that is reflected in S0975?
I believe that the NPEC created this content.
Who was the CME provider?
I believe it was Discovery International.
Do you know why Janssen agreed to support NPEC and this CME activity with an educational grant?
Because we felt that this was an appropriate educational program for clinicians.
Did Janssen play any role in determining the content of this NPEC continuing medical education program?
No.
This is a multi-dimensional program, as I recall. It had modules and websites and things like that, correct?
Yes, it was a multimodal program.
And was Janssen's support for this program disclosed as required in the rules that we had just gone over with Judge Botman?
Yes.
Now, besides this program, what other kinds of CMEs did Janssen fund in the pain therapeutic area, if you remember?
So there were multiple programs that we funded in the pain area, educational programs. The NPEC was a significant program because, again, it was multimodal. It was across, what I remember, I believe it was multiple years. We also funded a significant program with the Joint Commission to educate clinicians around the appropriate use of opioids. And so we did multiple programs from an educational perspective.
Now, we've talked about KOLs. Are there organizations outside of KOLs that Janssen also has supported?
Organizations outside of KOLs, so advocacy
That
organizations?
would be a perfectly good place to light.
Yes.
What is an advocacy organization?
So an advocacy organization is an organization in the community or in that therapeutic area that represents the views of either the professional organizations within that area or may represent the views and opinions of the patients in that area. So again, advocacy organizations are across all therapeutic areas, not just in pain. I'm sure you know of the American Cancer Society, Alzheimer's Association. There's just multitude of American Medical Association, professional as well as consumer advocacy organizations, again, representing the voice of their constituents.
And would those constituents include healthcare providers,
Yes,
patients,
yes,
industry?
yes.
And did Janssen work with and support advocacy organizations inside the pain franchise?
Yes.
How would you work with or support such an organization?
So oftentimes organizations, again, in the therapeutic area, would come to us. In some cases, we would support them through a corporate sponsorship. Oftentimes, they would come to us and let us know what their objectives were over the course of a year. They may have specific educational projects that they would like to create. We may fund those specific projects. There's also different, the larger organizations in this category. The American Pain Society had an annual meeting where different folks would come in, and they would have, their annual meeting had set up where they had CME activities, but they also had promotional activities for those where we may set up a booth where physicians would come by and we would engage in educational conversations with them. So there were a multitude of ways that we would engage and support the different advocacy organizations.
I think the court has already seen lists of contributions or grants to such organizations in the pain franchise. Did you coordinate or work with advocacy organizations in all areas of therapeutic endeavors at Janssen?
Yes.
Can you give us some idea of those organizations?
So I think I've framed out a few of them for you. But for instance, we saw that we are in the oncology franchise now. So the American Cancer Society, the Leukemia Society, specific to a specific oncologic drug. We have the American Heart Association with cardiovascular and metabolism franchise. And in neuroscience, the American Psychiatric Association, NAMI. And in this case, in our area, we've talked a lot about the different pain advocacy organizations that we've engaged with. And I think we'll talk more about them too.
You've got therapeutic groups that cover medical areas such as epilepsy, diabetes, cystic fibrosis, mental illness, heart disease, cancer. Do you support advocacy organizations in those therapeutic areas?
Yes. Again, the communities in which we engage, it's important that we engage across the board in those communities.
When Janssen helps to fund an advocacy organization, such as the ones you've described, does that mean that Janssen reviews and approves everything that organization says or does?
No.
If Janssen is asked to review material, what kind of process would it go through if it chose even to do that?
So if we engage with an advocacy organization, let's say on an educational project, and it is a collaborative type project where both of us are creating the content, then that would go through the full PRC process. So as we discussed earlier, the copy review process, all of that would go through that full process. That is, if we are engaged with them in creating the content.
Now, would that be, you've already talked a little bit about branded marketing.
Yes?
Would engaging with an advocacy organization on that level be considered branded anything?
No. An advocacy organization is not, they're focused on educating in the therapeutic area, not specific to a product. So the educational content or materials that we would engage with an advocacy organization on would be therapeutic area based, not product specific based.
You referred to it as unbranded educational campaign, I think, in your testimony.
Yes.
And can you explain to Judge Bachman why you refer to it that way?
So an unbranded educational campaign, again, is very educational and oriented. It's not product specific. Oftentimes when you say unbranded marketing, and I know the state, we've talked a lot about unbranded marketing, unbranded education. Unbranded marketing tends to be associated specifically with a product. And in the case of an unbranded educational type campaign, there's no specific, you're not talking specifically about a product. Again, you're talking more about a therapeutic area or a just the management of a condition. In this case, it would be, around like pain management. So it's more an educational campaign versus marketing to a specific product, if that makes
Why
sense.
would the people at Janssen engage in an unbranded educational campaign with somebody like the American Cancer Society?
Because again, that advocacy organization is engaged in the community in which this therapeutic area that we're engaged in, and likely they have come to us with an educational need that they would like to provide for their constituents. And this is an area that we would engage with them to provide that education for their, like I said, their constituents.
Is Janssen unique among pharmaceutical companies in supporting these advocacy groups?
No.
Is it common across the spectrum of pharmaceutical companies to do so?
Yes, it is common.
And is it done in the areas or therapeutic areas where the company has some special interest or expertise?
So it is done in the therapeutic areas in which we are engaged.
How does Janssen determine what kinds of unbranded educational projects it is going to engage in?
So again, what will happen over the course of a year, oftentimes the advocacy organizations will come forward, they will come to us, and they will talk to us about what they want to accomplish in this next calendar year, what educational projects they have going on. Oftentimes that discussion will take place around what are those educational needs, why do they want to approach the specific need in the marketplace. And we will look at, and there is oftentimes multiple requests that come in, and we need to look at which of those requests will reach the most people, that type of evaluation, and that's where we determine whether or not we fund those different educational activities.
Ms. Dean Eshelman, does Janssen disclose its role in this unbranded educational material?
Yes.
You have heard of several programs during the questioning in this case. Smart Moves, Smart Choices was one that was mentioned in opening. Can you tell the judge whether that's an example of this unbranded educational?
Yes, that is a clear example of an educational campaign that we did along with the Association of School Nurses. The funding associated with that program was clearly articulated in all of the materials, but that was in collaboration with the school nurses to provide that education around prescription drug abuse. Prescription drug abuse in teenagers.
You've told us what Janssen does. What does the advocacy partner bring to the mix?
So again, as we talked about, the advocacy organization is that voice of that group. So I would say consumer, but it's that constituent voice. So in the professional advocacy organizations, they represent the voice of the professionals, and what I'm saying there is the clinicians. So like the American Psychiatric Association, that is the professional group that represents the voice of the psychiatrists in the country. The American, let me use an example. The Association of School Nurses are representing the school nurses across the U.S. So that is a professional organization, and they represent the voice of their constituents. They came to us with an understanding that there was this problem with teen prescription drug abuse.
Now, you've mentioned a program there. You can take any one that you want in any therapeutic area you choose, but if Janssen contributes, how is this educational content created?
So again, it can, if the organization comes to us and is just requesting funding, that is, we determine whether or not, again, based on the level of funding, and that would be disclosed on whatever the materials are that they want to create. We may not be the sole funder. It may be multiple folks that help fund that, but that all is disclosed on those materials that are produced. In some cases, it may be a collaborative event or a collaborative situation where we, along with the advocacy organization, create the content. In that respect, that also is disclosed, that the content was developed by the two funded through Janssen.
If Janssen contributes to content, does that content undergo any type of review?
Yes, if Janssen creates any of the content, it does go through our PRC review, which is what we talked about in length earlier.
Now, if this is reviewed by the PRC, does that look any different from the PRC review you talked about earlier today?
No.
May I have just a moment, Chairman?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. There have been mentions of a few other programs in the course of our discussions with you over the last 4 or 5 now days.
Yes?
You mentioned Smart Moves, Smart Choices, which is one that was discussed.
Yes?
Do you remember discussion of one called Neo Pathways?
Yes?
Can you tell us briefly, just to remind us what that is?
So Neo Pathways was an unbranded materials that was produced prior to the Nucynta launch that was intended to educate doctors around the different issues that were taking place in the marketplace, along with educating doctors about the different pathways associated with pain and pain management. So if you remember, we talked earlier about tapentadol. Tapentadol had 2 different mechanisms. It had the mu opioid, but it also had that norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, both the ascending and the descending pathway. That was new to the market. That had not been in the market prior. And so prior to the launch of Nucynta, we educated the market around those different pathways associated with pain, along with some other market dynamics as far as pain.
I also believe, ma'am, you were asked earlier about something called Prescribe responsibly.
Yes.
Tell the judge, if you will, what your experience and familiarity with Prescribe responsibly is.
So Prescribe Responsibly was a program that we put together that was around the appropriate prescribing of opioids. It was a multi-module program that addressed assessment of pain. Initially, it went through all of the processes that a provider would go through for appropriate prescribing of opioids. So when we launched Nucynta and Nucynta ER, we felt it was important, well, specifically Nucynta ER, we felt it was very, very important that prescribers understood the management associated with, or had the tools to manage pain appropriately with opioids. And so this was a group of resources that we pulled together from all different aspects that went through, like I said, the initial assessment of a patient's pain, the risks associated with opioid utilization. It went through, and I'm not remembering them all right now, and then the reassessment to ensure that they were continuing to reassess patients, as well as resources for the patient and the caregiver. Those resources that were included in that were resources that were already developed and in the marketplace. They were developed by some of the key advocacy organizations, those the voice of that community. We just pulled them all together onto a website and provided those to physicians so that they could, have like one area that they could go in and access these different tools and resources.
And after this was all done, how was it made available to your audience, which I think you've told Judge Bachman is prescribers?
Yeah, so this was on a website.
Your Honor, we are at a point where if I can stop and break, I think we can edit down a bit. I probably have another hour and a half of direct or cross to go.
Okay.
And it would, I think, help if we could break now and I can hone this down a bit and hopefully move on.
It's up to you, Judge, but this is in our case in chief. We told you how long we were going to go. We'd rather keep going because we have other witnesses that are going to back up behind us. So that's our preference.
In response, if I might be heard, I don't think 17 minutes is going to make a difference, and I will remind Mr. Whitten that they had this witness on the stand for 4 days. I've now just taken about 6 hours, so I will finish up quickly.
I was planning on going to 5, but I'll give you that leeway.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And we hope this doesn't come against our time.
It won't.
Thank you, Judge.
All right, we will adjourn until 9 a.m. tomorrow.
We have a few housekeeping things to do.
Yes, let's do that now.
Drew, you want to do the